What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Echo is a champion that was released on May 28th in 2015, taking 8 months in total from start to finish to create, including both his concept art and finished assets. Echo's kit was designed by Riot Gypsylord, but back in the early phases of ideation, he was known by two names, Time Slugger and Time Assassin. Actual production started happening just after Callisto was released, and Riot were looking for a new take on assassins that they could bring into the game. Echo's a pretty interesting character in his playstyle and kind of outside of the norm for an assassin champion. So join me today in going back to the start to follow Echo's creation to find out what Echo could have been. And as always, if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely hit that like button, and if you don't, definitely hit that dislike too, because if this video hits 8,000 likes, I'm gonna buy myself some Chinese food. Anyway, when Riot looks to create a new champion, there's always two big deciding factors for the ideation process, the part where they dream up their future champions. Firstly, they consider if a certain role or position needs some attention in the form of a new champion, and secondly, they try to think about what design space they have yet to explore from a thematic perspective. The design team wanted to create a new assassin champion, and for the theme, they figured that they could really go with a new take on time magic. Gypsylord's first thought on creating a new time-based assassin was Weaver's Ultimate from Dota 2, and he was really interested in trying to find a way to make that kind of ability work in League of Legends. So with the core idea locked in for the new champion, it was time for Riot to start thinking about its character and its appearance. This was actually solved pretty early on, as it had actually already been discussed that they wanted to make a champion who was a teenager that puts Zaun in a new perspective previously. And so they combined the two concepts, and Edmundo and Chris from the art team came up with the first concepts of what would become Echo, that punk kid from Zaun with a smirk carrying an hourglass on his back. Echo's character concept timeline was actually shared by Riot Games with us, and it does an awesome job showing him moving through each step of the development process. It starts out with him just trying to get a feel for how the new Zaunite champion should maybe look. It's clear that from pretty early on, Riot settled on a man of color with some kind of iconic white hairstyle, but it took a few tries to nail down the right body type. Although the Time Assassin idea was locked down, they were experimenting with what they called Time Slugger, using a weapon almost like a baseball bat rather than any kind of blade. They didn't make a choice between a slugger or an assassin straight away, and Echo maybe could have ended up using any one of those tools instead. From swords to scythes and even some kind of a lance in that picture, similar to Jarvan's weapon of choice. Both body type and weapon choice would have quite a big effect on his kit, so the gameplay portion of design couldn't really start until the concept ideation had came to an end. Moving up the timeline, we see Time Assassin's character posed and equipped in different ways as Riot searched for an attitude that really fit the champion concept best. Although a lot of different champion looks were tested out for his wardrobe and his gear, it's around this point in the timeline when they settled on the Time Slugger kind of theme, leading him to using hard-hitting, blunt tools rather than any sort of weapon with a blade on it for slashing. Time Slugger was tested with a younger appearance, which was quickly adopted as the ideal look, being both a good fit for his gear and his attitude while also adding some more diversity into the champion pool. The next job was setting up his weapon design, and a ton of prototypes were thrown around. There were two main groups of blunt weapons tested for Time Slugger, the first being tools like pipe wrenches and tire irons. The next group was made up of more makeshift weaponry designed to work like clubs or batons maybe, some of them being charged with electricity or some other kind of energy. For Time Slugger, a bat-esque weapon ended up giving the right vibe for his character, so it was settled upon and further testing was done to narrow down exactly on how the weapon should look. Both one-handed and two-handed weapons were tested, and once Echo's name and backstory was in place, Riot eventually decided on giving him the hour hand of the Piltover Clock Tower, rather than going with a more makeshift weapon. Being a character from Zaun with a dislike, if not maybe a hatred for the, as Echo calls them, the Pilties of Piltover, it's a pretty cool nudge to his lore that he beats his enemies to death with something stolen from them. And with his character design pretty much locked in entirely, it was time for Riot Gypsylord to get to work on figuring out how to make a kit work for this new take on an assassin champion. Echo's lore was that of a smart kid that used his wits to survive, and Gypsylord's kit needed to reflect that intelligent nature. And he decided to implement this by rewarding predictive gameplay, where Echo players will need to try to predict what will happen and be rewarded if they're correct. Riot didn't want to just produce another assassin that's about completely burst one-shotting someone, so the next goal was to figure out how to make the assassin feel good when they aren't actually one-shotting enemies, and the solution was to create kind of like a utility assassin, and combining this with the predictive gameplay led Riot Gypsy Lord to the Echo design of gameplay that we're all familiar with today. But still, he didn't get it right straight away, mentioning that Echo had a billion different kits, with the only thing staying constant being the various versions of his Go Back in Time ability. Out of the few different ultimate versions that were tested for Echo, he had two really notable ones. The first version was really crazy. It worked like a save state when he casted it. It recorded the health, mana, cooldowns, and positions of everyone in the entire game. After 8 seconds were up, anyone that was still alive was returned to that original saved state 8 seconds ago. This was an incredibly interesting ability, but it kind of just caused people to just blow every cooldown instantly, and Ultimate desperately trying to get kills on targets because all that really mattered was you just staying alive for 8 seconds. It was also super hard to tell after a fight if the Ultimate actually worked out in your favor or not, because it was just so confusing since it was so crazy and ridiculous. The second Ultimate version was actually quite similar to what was displayed in his cinematic, and it was an ability that returned Echo and a targeted enemy to where they were exactly 4 seconds ago. It was disgustingly overpowered though, because it basically just guaranteed a kill on anyone trying to escape instantly, and to balance it, the design team would have to take away all of his mobility entirely, which would have left the rest of his gameplay feeling way too slow and lackluster. His ultimate was tested in a ton of different ways, though it was always about turning back time. It proved to be pretty hard to find a place that felt good for Echo to use without being totally unfair to enemies. The key to finding that balance was to understand the variance that an ability is going to have, giving enough that is healthy but not too much to make it binary, as in it's just going to do one of two things with nothing in between. This was actually one of the issues with Riot's first attempt at a time-based assassin called Tempest, who had an ability that would nuke a target for a ton of damage, but if they didn't die, it would be cancelled out after however many seconds. And we talked about Tempest a little bit in a previous video, so if you want, you can go watch that. We're going to link it in the outro. And that ability was a great example of something that is very binary. Either the damage will stick or it just won't, and it's a great example of, well, bad design overall, honestly, since there aren't really many options or techniques that you can use with the ability. It's important that there is some level of variance for healthy, fair, and just generally fun gameplay so that it doesn't get stale. Echo's release ultimate might feel a little bit less epic thematically than a rewinding time for the entire map for 8 seconds, but it has the right balance of variance. A well-timed ultimate can mean a great escape or some insane damage, and there's still ways to counterplay it for the enemy team by maybe tracking out the ghost or baiting out the rewind. Echo's Q went through a few different concepts as well, one of them being kind of similar to a Riven Q with 2 casts actually. Each cast would teleport him a short distance forward, and then give him a ranged attack for his next attack. This actually gave him an awesome kiting pattern, able to jump back and attack despite not being in melee range any longer and just kiting all over the place. Imagine it being kind of like a 2-charge version of what his E ended up being. And this version of the ability didn't really end up working out for Echo, but Riot Gypsy Lord did mention that he was interested in trying it out on a different champion one day, so we maybe will see it in the future actually. Although in the end he opted for the ranged harass tool in the form of Timewinder, there was also a version where Echo could recast the Q a second time on his Timewinder ability to call it back manually at any time. This version did give more of a feel of mechanical complexity, but it kind of had the same drawback as some of the Ultimate versions. It just was too binary for gameplay. It stopped being about intelligent positioning or aiming or predicting your opponents and became more of a question of, if it's going to hit my target, I'll pull it back instantly. If not, I'm just going to wait and try and reposition it. And so by getting rid of the decision making from the mechanical side of things, it actually puts the decision making back into Echo's strategy and predictiveness and how he plans to use Timewinder in the first place. And it made Echo feel a lot smarter to play, and it's definitely a much closer match for him thematically. And as for his W, one version that was tested actually used to be what is now his ultimate Chrono Break, with the exception that it had a way lower cooldown because it was a basic ability. This not only meant that Echo could rewind time for himself every maybe 20 seconds or so, I believe was the cooldown on the ability, but he would also get access to that power way earlier in the game. And if that sounds ridiculous, well, you would definitely be right, because Riot Gypsy Lord mentioned that it was the most broken thing he had ever seen in a champion design ever. Once it was moved to his ultimate, a new replacement needed to be found for his W, and so they came to kind of like the stun zone interaction thing, but the older versions of the W that he has now weren't really well received by testers because they were either just totally broken or totally useless. For example, at the start, it used to give no shield or no slow zone, but it also wouldn't show the enemy where the indicator was. It was required for Echo to be inside the zone the second it detonated though, but this meant that all of a sudden enemies would just get stunned instantly without any warning for a huge amount of time. And if Echo managed to get inside the zone along with an enemy, it would be crazy unfair to them, and that version was just super broken. And if he didn't get inside the zone in time though, it would just be a totally wasted ability. And this actually nearly ended in the ability being scrapped altogether, but fortunately Riot Gypsy Lord managed to tweak it just the right way to find a way to make it work in a way that felt good for Echo to use, but still offering some really nice healthy counterplay options for the enemy team. There's not a whole lot of information on the different versions of Echo Z, but what we do know is that Riot felt like Echo needed some kind of cool time distortion ability, and having it as a blink tied in pretty well with that actually, as Echo, slips through time for like a mini teleport. And they also took some inspiration from the previous scrapped version of his Q, the one that had 2 dashes on it, cut it in half to make it a little bit more balanced, and it worked out quite well for him mechanically as well, giving him a way to dodge projectiles and giving him a really impactful feel when it blinks to an enemy. As a utility assassin, it was much more important for him to fight in shorter skirmishes rather than just commit to a kill and then escape, so a 2-part dash was a really cool way to give Echo control over how to fight over a prolonged period of time, because it makes it really powerful as an initiation tool, but a little bit less powerful as a disengage tool, so it's a really awesome ability that has some awesome versatility too. Echo was Riot's first successful attempt at an assassin that offers so much more than just raw damage, and although he was meant to be kind of a squishy mid laner, he did end up being a little bit more broken as straight up Tank Echo, but a lot of this came down to his mobility and crowd control, and although Tank Echo's been nerfed pretty hard by Riot to pull him back into the assassin territory, it did really help show how flexible his design truly was. Echo could have ended up completely controlling the map for 8 seconds by himself, or just being another standard burst damage assassin, but it's really awesome for us to see the look back into Echo's design history and find out how he ended up how he is today. We hope you guys enjoyed the ride. Please leave a comment with your thoughts on what Echo's design is, or let us know who we should maybe cover next. And looks like that's going to be it from me. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.